Am I the asshole for telling my husband I don't want to give our child his last name? My husband and I have been friends since middle school, dating since junior year of high school, and we got married as soon as I graduated college. We've been married for 2 years now, and we just found out I'm pregnant with our first child. When we got married, I hyphenated our last names, with my last name being first, because I believe marriage is a union, and taking his last name felt like him claiming ownership over me. My husband was frustrated with this decision, but I stood my ground and was not going to budge. He eventually accepted this, but he did not hyphenate his last name. This bothered me for reasons I can't explain, but I never brought it up as something I had a problem with because I honestly understand. Now I'm pregnant and I wanted to tell him now, while we still have 8 months to discuss it, that I want to hyphenate our child's last name. He blew up on me, telling me how I'm being ridiculous and that I can't actually expect him to be okay with that, and he just won't stand for it. I told him I want our child to have our last names. He told me it wasn't his last name, it was mine. I told him that he is the ridiculous one for not realizing how silly he sounded by saying my hyphenated last name wasn't also his name. Side note, before we even got married, he told me he wanted his hypothetical son to have his first name. I agreed, with some reluctancy if I'm being honest, but I love my husband and I love his name. I brought this fact up to him. If we had a son, my husband wants him to have his first and last name, and even if we have a daughter, she'll still have his last name. I told him that it wasn't fair. I even told him we could put his last name first when we hyphenate, but he was not having it. I went on to say that my sister has constant problems because her son doesn't have her last name, even though the father has never been in my nephew's life. She gets questioned by doctors and teachers if she's really his mom, and since she's gotten married, she even has problems with getting him under her husband's TRICARE. I told him if we ever separated, I don't want those problems. Then he blew up on me again for assuming we would separate, and that's when I finally snapped and told him he was being a stubborn, self-centered man-child. He knew that wasn't what I meant, and he was being extremely obtuse. He left to cool down, and now I'm getting texts from my mother-in-law saying that I was being unreasonable and manipulative and had to reduce the insults to throw a fit to get what I want, even though I didn't get what I wanted. I can understand he wants his child to have his last name, but I feel like hyphenating it is still giving the child his last name. So, am I the asshole? See, I think, honestly, this is a discussion that you should have had prior to marriage if you were really so passionate about it. Like, yo, by the way, our kid's gonna have both our last name. I don't think it's a fucking big deal. Like, honestly, what I plan to do, inshallah, I don't know, is that I would have the kid's first name, my last name as their middle name, and then my husband's last name. It's just a name to me, but to each their own.
Storytime about meeting my mom for the first time after being told she was dead my entire life. So as you could have probably guessed, I grew up with my dad, who I've always had a kind of rocky relationship with, mainly because for as long as I can remember, he's had a drinking problem. Whenever he drank, he would always do things out of spite, like locking me out of the house on purpose, yelling at me for trivial things, including looking like my mom, and even going so far as to not buy groceries or food for the house, which usually ended up with me staying at my best friend's house just to get the bare necessities. It got so bad that when I turned 14, my best friend's mom ended up getting a hold of my grandmother, and my grandmother came to take me away from him. She had no idea what was going on in our household and was horrified when she found out. While staying with my grandmother for a few months, my dad would sometimes make appearances, but my grandmother would never let him stay for too long. She made it very well known that she felt like he was incapable of properly taking care of me, and I didn't disagree with her. However, it wasn't until my grandmother and I got to talking that she revealed to me that she had been trying to locate and contact my mother for over 2 years, just to give her updates about my life and me. Now, the reason this was so shocking to me is because my father had been telling me for about 7 years that my mother was dead. In fact, I remember being 8 years old and asking him about her myself, and he immediately followed up with, and I quote, "She died, and she did it to herself, if you catch my drift." I cried all night, and I never forgot that day. For reference, I am now 21, and it wasn't until I turned 15 that I finally met my mom and learned the real truth behind my existence. Now, before I go on, I feel the need to explain. As an adult who is going through their own healing process, I completely understand why my mom did the things she did, and I am happy that she's in a place where she's happy and she's doing right by the children that she currently has. With all that being said, when I finally met my mother, she was married and had 2 other children in which she was raising with her husband. Hearing this, I had second thoughts about meeting her, mainly because I was pissed. Mind you, I was a teenager with very little understanding about what was going on, but I ultimately agreed to meet her. After my grandmother set everything up, I showed up on her doorstep, ready to have a conversation. When she opened the door, she acted surprised to see me, giving me a fake Hallmark smile and basically saying, "You look great." I dismissed it and wanted to get straight to business. When she finally did get around to telling me the story, I listened. According to my mom, she had been in an abusive relationship with my father for years, and when she finally began slipping away from him, he attempted to force her to have a baby in order to keep her around. So when she did end up pregnant, she wanted to keep the baby away from him, but he would have been the more fit parent because she didn't have her own job and no real resources to take care of the child. So when she had me, she decided to renounce her rights and simply have no contact with me whatsoever. In her words, this was her way of breaking free of him. After she renounced her rights, she changed her name, moved to a new place, and basically started her life all over again. Now, again, as an adult, I can understand this, but at that moment I was livid, and you wouldn't believe how I blew up on her. As you could have guessed, I completely went off on her. It wasn't my intention to do so, but not only did she completely abandon me with someone she knew was an abuser, but she never thought to come back to check on me. Not to mention, with the looks of her house and her new family, she could have easily afforded to take me away from him, but none of that ever crossed her mind. So what was even the point of sitting down and having a conversation with her? She was only telling me things I already knew. I ended up storming out of there because she couldn't give me answers to the very logical questions that I was asking her. When I left, I felt like she wasted my time, and even more so, I was angry with myself for getting my hopes up thinking she was going to tell me something that was just life-changing. It was baffling to me that she was a disappointment as an abandoner and as a mom. Now, I know that's extreme, but it's how I felt. In the end, I came home to my grandmother and told her about the entire thing. My grandmother played devil's advocate, of course, but at the end of the day, we settled on the fact that it would not be beneficial for me to try to build a relationship with my mom. Or, well, I came to the realization that that wasn't what I wanted. Fast forward 7 months later. It's Christmas, and I get a call from my mom's new husband, and you'll never believe what he said. When my mother's new husband called me, he was basically trying to invite me to Christmas, claiming that it would be nice for me to get to know my other siblings. I won't lie, I laughed, and let him know that his children were not my siblings, and that it would be beneficial for us both if he quite literally forgot that I existed. What caught me off guard was the fact that he kept asking me when my birthday was, and what all my mother actually told me. I was quite honestly going to tell him to go screw himself, but he had me curious, so I told him. He paused for a long time before telling me that he would really like to see me for Christmas. It was such a weird and cryptic conversation that I did end up going. I even decided to bring my grandma. She was not happy about going, but she put on her Sunday's best nonetheless and accompanied me to dinner. Our timing was impeccable because by the time we got there, the food was already ready. My mom looked kind of surprised to see my grandma, but in my opinion, she shouldn't have been. Either way, the dinner was so excruciatingly awkward that I ended up spending half the time looking at their tree and wondering if any of the presents under it were for me. But I was quickly snapped out of my thoughts when my mother's husband dismissed the 2 children from the table and looked my mother in the face just to ask, "Is Janice my daughter?" My grandmother dropped her fork and I nearly choked on my water, but my mother's new husband, we'll call him Brian, didn't even notice because he was so focused on my mom's face. After my grandmother finally regained her composure, she raised a brow in my mother's direction because she, like the rest of us, wanted an answer. I expected my mom to deny it, but instead she looked down at her plate and said, "I don't know." My grandmother was not satisfied with that answer. In fact, she urged my mother to explain herself. But after a few moments of her silence, Brian finally spoke up. According to him, he was aware that my mother was in an abusive relationship. In fact, he was one of the people that urged her to get out of it, not just for her safety, but because he was in love with her. He didn't deny that they were fooling around, but when my mother made it clear that she wasn't interested in leaving the situation she was in, he demanded that she choose him or my father. My mother chose my father, which was the last straw for Brian, and he left. A couple of years passed before he saw her again, and when she ran into him, she made it clear that she no longer had attachments with my father. He didn't even know I existed until last year when my grandmother got in contact with her about me. She told him that my father and her had a baby together and that she revoked her rights and moved on. But when I showed up on the doorstep, he looked into my eyes and saw the eyes of his other 2 daughters and started to question everything my mother has said so far. Now he wanted to know the truth, and so did the rest of us. When my mother finally spoke up, she explained that she was unsure. She knew that she had been involved with Brian and my father at the same time, but she assumed that I was my father's because she felt the timelines added up, and even went so far as to say that I looked more like my father than Brian, only to see me now and not be sure. Brian was angry, but he was nowhere near as angry as my grandmother. Before anyone could say anything, my grandmother stood up from the table, yelling at my mother, "You mean to tell me that you abandoned this child with my son and you weren't even sure if he was the father?" I can't honestly remember the rest of the argument because I was deep in my own little world. She left me with him, knowing that he was an abuser, and with full knowledge that he may not even be my father, all the while starting a new life with a new man who apparently wasn't new at all. That could have also been my father? Yeah, I was losing it, and everyone's arguing did nothing but make me even more furious. Before I could stop myself, my hand slammed against the table. When I finally fixed myself to speak, I said, "I don't care about the circumstances, and I don't care about your arguing. A paternity test needs to be done. When I find out who my father is, I will deal with you then." And I stormed out. My ride home with my grandmother was excruciatingly silent until she finally said, "No matter what way these results go, you will always be my granddaughter." And I appreciated her for that, but she and I wasted no time getting the paternity test materials. The hard part was having to contact my dad and tell him everything that happened. You won't believe what he said. When I finally told my dad about the events of our Christmas dinner, he was speechless. I half expected him to say that he knew, then maybe the abuse and neglect would make sense. But instead, he actually started crying and giving me this long-winded speech about how I was the only good thing in this world that he had ever done, and that he was currently in rehab, which is why I hadn't heard from him. I can't lie, I felt all kinds of emotions. But I did ask him if he ever thought at any point that I wasn't his kid, and he said yes. There was a brief moment when I was first born that he thought that I wasn't his, but chalked it up to jitters from being a dad for the first time. Either way, he was more than than willing to submit his DNA so that we could find out for good. My grandmother asked Brian the same, and after we submitted the information, it took 2 weeks for us to get the results. When we got them, I immediately called my dad in rehab and said, "You are not the father. Somebody call Maury that is not your baby." I'm just kidding, I didn't say that. But I did confirm his worst fears by letting him know that he was indeed not my father. But then that meant that I had to call Brian next and tell him the results as well. You won't believe how he responded to the news. When I called Brian to let him know that he was my father, he sighed. I mean, like a genuine sigh. And I honestly couldn't tell if he was happy or not. Instead, he flat out asked me if I was okay with him being my father. I told him honestly that I couldn't tell him over the phone. So he invited me once again to come to his house. My grandmother insisted on coming, and I definitely didn't stop her. When we got there, Brian was already waiting outside for us. And as soon as I got out of the car, he hugged me for a long time and then apologized to me for not being active in my life. Now, I won't lie, it wasn't him that I blamed. In fact, I felt like my mother was the catalyst to all of this. When I asked where she was, he informed me that she packed a few of her things and left. He claimed that she felt guilty and didn't know how to face me, so she left to take a little break, which to me just sounded like she was playing the victim in a situation that she created, but that's just my take on it. Either way, Brian invited me to live with him and his 2 daughters. He also asked my grandmother if he could formally adopt me. My grandmother, of course, said the decision was all mine, which I admired her for. I ended up living with my grandmother for 3 more years before transitioning into the home of Brian and his daughters. I won't lie, it's been a very different experience, but I lived with him until I went away to college. I am 21 now, and I'm hoping to add to my family here in the next 4 months. I do still keep in touch with my father that raised me. From the last time we talked, it sounds like he's doing well and has even met someone new that he's sharing his life with. My sisters are in high school, and from what I hear, they're doing great. One of them is in band, the other is pursuing art. We have a pretty good relationship, and I'm hoping to build on it. My grandmother passed away last year, and it was a really hard day for us all, but I genuinely think that she held in there just to see me make it, and I will never forget her for that. As far as my mother, Brian says he keeps in touch with her, but I genuinely think that the day that she left was the day that he kicked her out, but he'll never admit that to me, of course. Either way, according to him, she's doing well on her own. I want to believe that, but right now I have my own family brewing, and all I can do is hope that I'll be half the mother that my grandmother was. Do you think she'll mind if I name my child after her? I guess we'll see. Wish me luck.
Okay, so I just realized I don't do a lot of story times on here, probably because I'm a 21-year-old mom of 2, so there's nothing really interesting going on in my life. But today I was thinking about how me and my husband got together. Well, a little PSA, he was like the bad boy that like all the girls liked. I was really reserved, innocent, kept to myself. I was like the angel, you know. Well, so my husband asked me on a date, and at first I was like, I don't know about it. Like, you're who you are, I'm who I am. Like, I've always had a crush on you, but I just don't know. Like, we live 2 different lives. Well, I ended up letting him take me on a date. The very first time I got in his car, it smelled like a plant in there. And also, he was a dealer. I'm not going to say the word because I don't want this video to get taken down. But he was a dealer. So I got in his car and it smelled like the plant in there. And I got really, really nervous because I wasn't used to getting in vehicles that smelled illegal. So I was in the car. I was sitting there. I was nervous, of course, because I had a crush on him. But, you know, there were so many things running through my mind. Well, this fool pulls out a thing, okay? You know what I'm talking about? Pass. So I'm just sitting there like, you know, nervous, like what's going on? Like, this is not okay. So this fool looks at me and goes, "Oh." And I was like, "No, thank you." And he was like, "Oh my gosh, do you want me to put this out?" And I was like, yes, please. Like, who do you think I am? Okay. Anyways, he was a real gentleman though. He got me flowers. We went to Cheesecake Factory, had an awesome day. Okay. Second time we ever hung out was on my 18th birthday. I went over to his house for the second time. This is the second time we hung out. So I was over there and there was a medicine bottle on the cabinet and, you know, it was that little lean or whatever. So, I didn't know what that was, of course. And he was like, "So are you into this?" And I was like, "No, absolutely not. You should know that by now. I'm not into that." So we fast forward, we get into his car after we're done hanging out. Johnny's going about 40 miles over the speed limit. And all of a sudden there's cop lights behind us. And then he starts speeding faster. I'm freaking out. My heart is racing. Never been in this situation. It's my 18th birthday. I think, oh my gosh, I'm about to go to big people jail. Like, I was freaking out. So, he looks at me and he's like, "Are you okay?" And I was like, "No, I'm not okay. Like, what are you doing?" And he was like, "I'm speeding away from the cop." And I was like, "No, you're not. You're about to pull over, because his lights are on." And he's like, "No, I'm telling you, I get away all the time, like, yada, yada." And I was like, "No, you're not going to get away. We're going to pull over." There's cop lights behind us. He's speeding like crazy. I'm freaking out, and he tells me he's just gonna speed away from the cop. And I said, "No, you're not. You're gonna pull over, and we're gonna get the consequence. So he pulls into a neighborhood and lights a black. For those of you who don't know what a black is, it's like a great value, wannabe, nasty, skimpy version of a cigar. So you get them for 2 cents at the gas station. But anyways, he lights his black to mask the smell of the plant in his car, which he didn't have it in his car at the moment, but his car always smelled like that because he always had it in his car. So anyways, the cop comes and rolls down the window and he's like, "Hey sir, you were trying to speed away, weren't you?" And Johnny's like, "No, I wasn't. I was trying to pull us safely into a neighborhood." "Okay, Johnny." Anyways, cop let that go. So then he says, "You got marijuana in this car?" Flashlight like this. Johnny, I will never forget this, hits his black, blows it in the officer's face, and says, "You don't smell nothing, do you?" I don't know why that man didn't take us to jail right then and there. Obviously, the cop was mad because Johnny was being a smart butt the whole time. So he looks over at me and he's like, "Give me your ID." And I'm like, "What? Yes, sir. Yes, sir." So I get my ID out and I give it to him. He looks at my ID and says, "Keep in mind, this is on my 18th birthday." And he's just being a butthole to me because Johnny was just disrespecting him, rightfully so. He looks at me and says, "Your license is expired," and tosses it back at me. I was like, "Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I will get that thing tomorrow." Johnny texted me that night and he's like, "You know what? You're a good girl. You're too innocent for me. I'm not going to change. We shouldn't be together." After crying and wallowing in my self-pity all day, I texted him and I said, "No." I said, "I think you do want to change and I believe that you will." And here we are 4 years later, 2 beautiful kids, just bought our home and we're married. I'm sorry if y'all thought part 2 was going to be just as interesting, but if there's any other stories y'all want to hear, just let me know. I don't know why he didn't take Johnny to jail that night, but he did end up writing him a fat ticket.
Storytime on when my father asked me for explicit pictures of myself. Now, I won't lie, this one is going to need a bit of a backstory. I grew up with my grandmother because my mother was and still is a drug addict to this day, who is not active in my life. My father was simply a deadbeat, but he did show up for the first time when I was around 15 years old, claiming that he wanted to establish a relationship with me. He stuck around for a month and a half before disappearing. Yeah, I didn't see or hear from him again until I went to college. He ended up randomly calling me out of the blue, asking if we could go to dinner and talk more about building a relationship and mending the distance between us. So I ended up going, even though I didn't want to. But a part of me felt like I just didn't want to go because I was still angry at him for being a crap father. Thanks to my anxiety, I ended up showing up pretty early, but he somehow still managed to get there before me, which made me feel like, wow, he's really invested, I should give him a shot. But the moment I sat down, he started this weird pity party for himself, claiming that he wasn't in my life because my mother was insane. Well, I can't say he was wrong, but mind you, he and his family were keenly aware that my mother dropped me off at my grandmother's house when I was 3 months old and never looked back. And at that point of us talking, I was in college. Even so, he finally opens up to say that he went to the doctor recently, and things were not looking good. According to my father, they were running some tests, and he was afraid that he might not be okay, so he felt like mending things with his only child was the most important thing at the time. Now, I won't lie, I thought it was BS, but I couldn't tell if I thought it was BS because it was, or because I was just angry, so I accepted his apology, and agreed to attempt to build a relationship again. But, shocker alert, he disappeared again for 3 months, and I tried everything to get in touch with him, because I thought he had died. I ended up contacting his sister via Facebook, and she finally responded to tell me what his test results said. According to her, he came back with a clean bill of health. So naturally, the reason he stopped talking to me was because he felt like since he was healthy, there was no reason to mend anything between us. Fast forward 6 months later, his sister contacts me claiming that he was begging her for my contact information so that we could get back in touch again. I was going to say no, but instead, I decided to give him an ultimatum that if he jumped out of my life again, he was not going to be allowed back in. He then claimed that he was absent for so long because he was on the brink of being homeless and needed $600 in order to stay afloat. Me being a college student who got a refund check, I didn't mind giving him the money, but in hindsight, I probably shouldn't have. Either way, he ended up calling me that night, claiming that he missed me and that he was sorry for being a deadbeat. I can't lie, I thought that was a turning point for us, because he had actually never apologized for that before. And then he asked me to send him a picture of myself, so I took a regular selfie, super cute, and he responded with, and I quote, "Can you send me another one? I can't see with all of your clothes on." The woman was too stunned to speak, so naturally I hung up on him. Fast forward 4 years later, I hadn't heard from him since that last conversation, so I wrote him a letter. The letter I wrote and mailed to him was basically telling him that I forgave him. I even went into explicit detail of all the things I forgave him for in case he forgot. Even after sending the letter and getting confirmation that he received it, I still didn't hear from him for another 2 years, and you'll never believe what he said. When my father ended up calling me, he started off by saying that he didn't appreciate my letter, and even more so, he didn't appreciate the excerpt I wrote about him in my book that I published about my life. Now, the book was my first publication, and I didn't have an editor, so it kinda sucked a little bit, but it was the truth nonetheless. I kindly informed him that if he wanted to write a book and change the narrative, then he could do that. But considering he couldn't keep his own lies straight, it was definitely not recommended. When he started going on a tangent about how he demanded respect from me, I laughed and told him that the conversation was over, and that if he was waiting on respect from me, he would be holding his breath until he died died. At that point, I had firmly decided that my father was no longer a part of my life, which wasn't really hard considering he wasn't really a part of my life in the first place. A couple of weeks later, his sister ended up messaging me on Facebook, claiming that my father once again went to the doctor and got some bad news. I sarcastically asked her what it was this time. A heart attack, a stroke, a sudden realization that he was a piece of shit, because I was so fond of these little cliffhangers that she liked to leave me every few years. She, however, did not appreciate my snark and claimed that I needed to respect him, stop calling him by his first name, and forgive him already. I won't lie to you, I lost my cool. I flat out told her that she should be ashamed of herself. As a mother, she was defending her brother for being a deadbeat father, not to mention defending the fact that he was low-key a pedophile, and that I'm pretty sure they've known he's been this way his entire life, and instead of helping him, they've enabled him, and I was not interested in joining their team to do that. I kindly told her that she was now blocked, and I'd appreciate it if she didn't send me any more messages from him, because unlike most people, I believe in shooting the messenger, because it sends a message, doesn't it? Either way, I've enjoyed the radio silence for the past few years. That is, until last year, when one of my father's exes called me, and you'll never believe what she told me.
Seems every time I take a drink, I'm reaching out for you. Seems I'm always late night texting, reaching out for you. Every morning I find drunken messages spilling the truth on you.
When my father's ex told me that he was in prison, I was stuck. And I mean stuck to the point where all I could do was laugh, because what else was there to say? When I finally did get around to catching my breath, I asked what happened. According to Rhonda, my father was in prison for assault. How did he land in this predicament, you ask? Well, it turns out my father was lying about more than what I thought he was. He was telling Rhonda, as well as his family, that he was paying my college tuition, that he bought me a car, that he was paying my bills, etc. Mind you, I put myself through school and I'm still paying off student loans. I bought my own car. I've always had a job since I was 14, and he borrowed $600 from me, yet he was paying for all this stuff while also living with his parents. If 2 plus 2 is 4 and 5 plus 5 is 10. But I digress. I've learned to stop being surprised by the lies my father has told. When I see something new, I'll throw $1 at it. But because of his lies, he attracted the attention of this new girl that he was dating. The one that's younger than me? Yeah. Apparently he was spending all kinds of money on her that he didn't actually have. So, instead of her telling him that she had a boyfriend, she continued to let him lavishly spend money on her, while also tricking him into believing that he was in a relationship with her. Fast forward a few months down the line, and she's pregnant. My father is over the moon, thinking that he gets a chance to restart, only for the girl's boyfriend to approach him after the baby is born and tell him that both the baby and the girl belong to him, and that my father is the one that's intruding. And sadly, my father could not handle this, so he and the girl's boyfriend get a little physical, and my father ends up in prison. I wish I had a time machine. Down with the I wish I had a time machine.
Am I the asshole for getting upset with my husband after he told me nothing will change while I'm pregnant? So me, 26 female, and my husband, 28 male, who I'll call Jake for the story, have been together for 5 years and married for 3. We have recently started trying for a baby, as we both felt like that was the next step in our life together. And 3 weeks ago, I got a positive test back. We were really happy and told our families, and now my mom and mother-in-law want to throw a big baby shower for us. It was just super good news all around. Well, 2 nights ago, me and Jake were getting ready for bed when he reminds me to go through the house and make sure all the lights are off. Now, he can be a little lazy at times, and it has become a nightly routine for me to make sure all the lights are off that he leaves on before we go to bed. I wasn't feeling very well and asked if he could just do it since he wasn't doing anything, and he was literally standing by the door. He then tells me, "No, this is what is expected of you every night." I was just a little hurt, but I didn't want to fight with him, so I just did it. When I came back, Jake goes on this very long and unprovoked rant saying things like, just because you are pregnant does not mean anything will change, and you are still expected to cook, clean, and do all the chores every day, because how can you be expected to be a mother if you can't handle a little work? He wasn't yelling or anything, he was just talking to me quietly as if I was 2 inches tall. I was shocked because I had never heard him say anything like this. This rant went on for about 30 minutes before I interjected and asked, "Well, what do you plan on doing to help me with all of this?" He then got extremely defensive, saying he works his ass off at his job to provide for me and what is going to be our future children. For context, I don't work at the moment. My job was not paying enough to justify me going in, so I am a full-time college student. He ended up saying that it doesn't matter how I feel physically or mentally, it's a mother's job to push through, and if he helped and babied me, I wouldn't be a good mother. I got extremely upset and started yelling, and I said that I wish I would have known this is how you felt before I got pregnant with your baby. There was a moment of silence before he started crying, and he left for the night to stay at his mother's house. What a bitch. He hasn't been back yet, and my mother-in-law and sister-in-law have called me berating me and saying I broke Jake's heart with what I said and I need to apologize immediately, and until I do, he isn't coming home. I don't know how to feel. So, am I the asshole for yelling at my husband after he said he isn't helping me with anything during the pregnancy because it's a mother's job to deal with it?
Am I the asshole for cheating on my husband with his brother? My husband and I have been married for 3 years, but my husband's always been very boring and kind of bland. The crazy thing is that I was the one that chased him and wanted to be in a relationship. I was 20 years old when we met, and I met him through a friend. He was kind of charming when I first met him, but what I really liked about him was that he was a doctor, he owned 2 houses and a beach house, and he seemed like a really responsible guy. Before him, I only ever met broke guys, so when I met him, I was like, oh my god, this guy could be it. Oh, and the other thing is that he's extremely shy, so he was not about to make a move on me or even talk to me, so I convinced my friend to invite us all out to dinner so that I could get a chance to talk to him. Throughout the entire dinner, he was so shy he basically avoided me. But then after the dinner, he told my friend that he thought I was cute. So I knew that I could win him. After that, we only saw each other at friends' parties, so on one occasion, I decided to just throw myself at him. I kissed him and I waited for his response. He said, thank you. He finally asked me out on a date and it was okay. I could definitely see me living my life with him. Obviously a boring one, but you know, whatever. We were engaged for 6 months and we started living together after that. He basically lets me do whatever I want with his money, and he also helped me open up my own business. So no, I'm not just living off of his dime, okay? Fast forward to quarantine, his brother came to live with us. And this is when things got really complicated. His brother is the total opposite, makes me laugh and we have so much fun together. Like, really good fun. So his brother moved in with us during quarantine. And as soon as he moved in, I was finally laughing and having fun. Like I said, my husband was really boring and shy. So you can imagine, like, even in bed, he was super boring. Like, he never wanted to do it. And if I ever asked him to, he would just say he was tired. So I got really sick of that. When his brother came to live with us, he would make jokes, we would laugh. He basically made me feel alive again. Here's how things went down with him. My husband loves to go golfing with his golfing buddies, so he would leave every single day for like 2 to 3 hours just to do that. So I was pretty much all by myself all day. He would also spend a lot of time where he worked at a hospital. On the other hand, his brother was home all the time. He and I would watch movies. He even started helping me out with my online business, and soon we became really good friends. I would tell him everything. I would even complain about how boring his brother was. One night we decided to have pizza and wine, and between us we both had 3 bottles. Throughout the movie we kept laughing, and every time I would just get closer and closer to him. Eventually I was sitting right next to him. That's when we look at each other and we just started macking on. It was uncontrollable passion and I didn't know how to stop, and we ended up doing it. As we were making out on the couch, I just kept thinking how much better my life would be with him as opposed to his boring brother. One thing led to another and we ended up doing it, and it was magical. And then every single day after that, we would kind of just smile at each other. When my husband was at home, he would steal kisses from me. If I was sitting on a chair, he would come by and quickly tickle my shoulder. I was living like a full-on romance novel. Of course, my boring husband didn't even notice. I was suddenly happy all the time. One day I asked my husband if he had noticed the change in me, and he said, "You're being silly. What are you talking about?" And right there, that confirmed that my husband didn't even care that I was suddenly happier. He wasn't even bothering to ask why. Either way, his brother was staying with us until he found his own house. And guess what? He ended up moving in 2 houses away from ours. By the way, he also owns his own businesses, so he's really wealthy. He's tried to convince me to leave his brother, but I don't know. Sometimes I think my husband doesn't really like women, but I'm not sure. I know you guys will think it's easy to just get a divorce, but I don't want to break his heart either. But at the same time, I want to be happy too. What should I do? Help!
I was in a very bad car accident about 3 years ago. A drunk driver ran a stoplight, cut off a semi-truck, which then crashed into me, sending me crashing into 2 different cars and then ultimately into an embankment. My car was completely mangled and my legs were crushed, completely destroyed, and it had to be amputated. I also lost a couple fingers, the tip of one and all of the other. I'm also left with some gnarly scars that used to bother me, but I'm learning to deal with them. I got a couple different insurance payouts and some pain and suffering money in addition to my medical bills being paid, and with my money I purchased a custom-made leg to take the place of the one I lost. When I have pants and shoes on, you can hardly tell unless you're really looking. I still limp, but some days I don't have as pronounced a limp. Earlier today I went to the store with my boyfriend, my sister, her girlfriend, and our mother. I had to learn to drive with my left foot, but I'm really good at it now. I also bought a new car with my money and had to go through a ton of therapy to get past my PTSD, but I'm doing well there now as well. So I drove us, and because of my injuries, in addition to my leg, I also have chronic hip, neck, and back pain and some issues with my lungs from the time I spent intubated in medically induced coma that led to pneumonia. I have a handicap placard for my car. I have trouble walking without getting tired, so it really helps to park close to the door. Today I did so and unknowingly took the space from someone who was circling back around for it. Apparently the man had been looking for a close space and had missed the one I took and went down and around. He was still on the other aisle when I pulled in, so I didn't cut him off or anything and had no way of knowing that he wanted the spot. He parked in a yellow striped zone and got out and immediately began confronting me about stealing a space from him who actually needed it. How I'm just some kid who has no respect for those who are truly sick and suffering. He then ordered me to move. My group was just urging me to walk away, but this has happened before and once the police were even called. I'm sick of people thinking that just because I'm young, I don't have a legit need for a little extra consideration. I said, okay, and went to the car and got
sounded like I was going to drive off. I was wearing a skirt and leggings, so it wasn't quite obvious at first, but when I sat down, I took my leg off and showed it to the man, including my stump. I then asked him if it was okay if I still parked there. He walked away calling me disgusting and rude and said I could have just told him and I made him look stupid. My group was embarrassed and said that I made things awkward because there was a crowd. So, am I the asshole for taking my leg off and making someone look dumb and feel uncomfortable?
Story time! And this happened to me like 40 minutes ago. So I was driving home tonight and my apartment building is on a street that's a dead end. So I'm gonna make this hair clip my car. So I was driving onto my street. So if this is my street and it like ends there, my apartment building is here. So I was coming with my car here and I turned there onto the street and I parked about here. So all I had to do was walk from here to here, which is like 10 meters. And that's like, what, 30 feet or something. So it's really, really close. All I had to do was walk there. So I parked my car, I got out, and as I started walking towards the entrance of my building, a man that was actually close to my building saw me. And suddenly, he started running towards me. And as he was running, he was yelling, "Shut your mouth! Shut your mouth!" So I, luckily, was still close to my car. So I jumped back in and I locked the doors. And just as I did that, the man arrived at my car. So because I was already inside, he went to the front of my car, so here, and he put his hands on the hood of my car. And he was like, "Get out of the car! Open the window! Get out of the car!" So I was sat there and I knew what I had to do was put the car in reverse and back out of there to go back from where I came from because that's the only street out. So I put my car in reverse and his hands are still on the hood and he's still yelling at me. And I reverse, and as I'm doing that, he like follows my car and is like, you know, like following my movement with the car. So I was like, okay, well, I have to like really quickly like turn to go that way because if he goes to block the street, I'm stuck. Like I literally can't get out. So he's following me, his hands are on the hood of my car. I quickly turn and I get out of the street that way and I managed to get out. I then have to drive around for about 25 minutes, waiting for him to leave my street so that I could park my car and go home. I'm just really tired. Like, I just really want to be able to go home without that happening. I mean, I know that doesn't happen every day, but still, like, it happens often enough that it's really frustrating. I mean, not only is it obviously scary, but it's just like, why can't we just go home without being threatened?
To top this, the other day a customer came up to me and he's like, "Hey, I think this is broken, it's way too light, it's leaking." And I was like, "Okay, I'll take a look at it." I took a look, I grabbed the item. You know what the item was? It was canned air. It was air in a can. Okay, and he was like, "Yeah, it's broken." I looked back at him and I was like, "Oh wait, no, it's just air in a can. There's nothing but air. It's not supposed to be heavy or anything." And he looks back at me and he's like, "Are you trying to scam me into buying something that's broken?" And I was like, what am I supposed to say to that? I was like, "Oh, no, there's nothing else but air. It's not supposed to be heavy. It's not broken or anything." And he looks back at me and he's like, "I'm gonna go somewhere where they don't try to get me to buy broken things." And he walked away. He walked away. Like, what am I supposed to say? It was air in a can. It was canned air.
The most beautiful diamond you've got. The most beautiful diamond you've got. The most beautiful diamond eyes I've ever seen in my whole life. You've got the most beautiful diamond eyes I've ever seen in my whole life. The skyline is jealous, I'm looking at you, how you shine.
Story time on how I got nasty with my older sister's boyfriend while she was sleeping. Okay, so boom, let's jump right into it. So I have an older sister who's 18 and I'm 16. Her boyfriend, George, let's call him George because that's his name. Well, George is 20. He is very attractive. I'm talking fine. Every time he comes over, we flirt with our eyes and whenever my sister leaves the room. And my relationship with my sister isn't bad at all. She's older than me, so she brings me places, gets me food, and helps me out with homework. You know, normal sister duties. So I don't have anything against her, but her man is just so fine. I just really don't care about my sister's feelings whatsoever, like at all. So after our flirting became constant between us, things got real. My sister and her boyfriend were spending the night together, but George, the boyfriend, waited for my sister to fall asleep. And when she fell asleep, things got real. George, the boyfriend, waited for my sister to fall asleep. And once she fell asleep, he came over to my room and yeah, we did the nasty. Like literally with my sister in the room next door, we literally slept together. When we were done, he went back to my sister's room and she never found out. 2 months later, they broke up because he cheated with someone else, and we never seen him again. And 6 years later, my sister still doesn't know what I did. Should I tell her?
A 6th grade teacher asked your class the other day how many of them were Trump fans. And most of them not knowing what a Trump fan was, and of course wanting to be liked by their teacher, they all raised their hands. Well, all except for little Johnny. The teacher looks over at little Johnny and says, "Johnny, why are you being different again?" And he says, "Well, because I'm not a Trump fan." And she says, "Well, why are you not a Trump fan?" And he says, "Because I'm a Democrat." She says, "Really, why are you a Democrat?" He says, "Well, my mom's a Democrat and my dad's a Democrat, so I'm a Democrat." She says, "Oh, really? Well, what if your mom was a moron and your dad was an idiot? What would that make you?" Johnny smiles and says, "A Trump fan."
Story time about how I came out as bi to my parents. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. By the time I was 12 years old, I definitely knew I was bi. By the time I was 14, I'd already had a girlfriend and a boyfriend, but my parents did not know any of this. When I was 15, I even had a girlfriend for a full year. She would come around the house and I would say that she was my friend. But one day my mom walks in on me and my friend making out on the bed without our shirts on. My mom was so horrified that she actually ran out of the room. Later I explained to her that we were just playing a game and that it was popular at school. I basically convinced her that I was not bi. Or at least I thought I did. Later on that day, my dad comes to my room and basically asked me if I liked girls. I swore up and down that I didn't. Then when I was 16, I found myself having 2 girlfriends, don't ask me how. Again, they would each come over and I would just say they were my friends. I thought I was home alone, so I invited my girlfriend over. We start fooling around and that's when my door opens. My dad is looking at me getting it on with another girl. Part 2 is up. My dad walks in on me while I was fooling around with the girl in bed. Mind you, I'm a girl. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. Keep in mind, I had half of my clothes on. My dad literally picked me up from the bed and threw me out of my room. Then he kicked my girlfriend out. It was definitely traumatizing. My dad called my mom and told her to rush home. They interrogated me for 3 hours. I told them I'd had girlfriends and boyfriends. They were more than shocked. They finally calmed down and I was able to go to sleep. 2 days later, my dad tells me to pack my suitcase. I asked him why, but he wouldn't tell me. Then he drove me to a camp that promises to help your children who are bi. Instead of being afraid, I told my dad that I would try my best. I lasted about 2 days there. They basically made us do Bible study, and I was made to feel like a perv. So I packed my little suitcase and I left. So of course, I packed my suitcase, climbed 2 walls, and I was free. That's when I heard a really scary alarm. Part 3 is up. I thought I was free, but then I hear an alarm sound. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. I started running and I got to a main road. Luckily, a bus was pulling up right on time. I get on the bus and I go straight to my girlfriend's house, which was about 2 hours away. That means they would have already told my parents I had escaped. Well, when I get to my girlfriend's house, my parents are already there. But guess what? My parents weren't there to pick me up. They were there to drop off all of my things. Yep, that's right. They kicked me out of the house. Thankfully, my girlfriend's family were super cool and they let me live with them. When I turned 18, I got an apartment and a roommate. My entire family stopped talking to me. It's been 4 years since I last saw my parents. I recently got hired at my dream job, so I went to my parents' house and I told them. I also came out to them properly. At least this time I was not yelled at. I speak to my mom on the phone every now and then, but I feel like I should talk to my dad again. What do you guys think? I just want them to accept me.
So it's another day at VS, but this time it's semi-annual sale. If you've never shopped the semi-annual sale, it means that bras, panties, fragrances, clothing, swimwear, everything goes on sale at VS. Well, certain items get marked down for really good prices. But Victoria's Secret loves to plaster these signs that say $3.99, $14.99, and in very tiny letters at the bottom of the sign, it'll say the words, "and up." This means that all the panties in the bin are not $3.99. They're $3.99 and up. They can be all the way up to $7 or $10.99. Same thing for the bras. It'll say $14.99, but the most expensive bra could probably be $34.99. So this lady comes over with her bag full of sale items, full of panties, full of bras. She's too busy to be bothered with me, so I'm just rigging up her items. She's not even paying attention to the screen. Finally, I announce her total as being around like $400 or $500, and she is in shock, like, wait, what? Part 2 is coming. So I kindly explained to this lady that everything in the bin was $3.99 and up or $14.99 and up, so the prices may vary. She gets pretty annoyed. She's like, I went and picked up all this stuff, and the sign says that it's $3.99 and $14.99. That's the price I want it for. I'm not taking anything else. I'm already like, here we go. So I say, Miss, I'm really sorry about the confusion, but the prices are marked on the individual tags, despite what the sign says. I said I can go through the bras and possibly look for the ones that are $14.99 and all of the panties that are only $3.99 if that will make you happy. But no, that wasn't good enough for her. She's pretty annoyed, and of course, as per usual, she wants to speak to a manager, and I kindly tell her the sale price is the sale price. Unless it goes down, that's what it is. First, she says, I'm not going to take any of it. Delete it all. I say, okay. Then she decides, just kidding, after I've already deleted it, she wants it all again. So it's another day at VS. We had a promotion for a free bag. If you spend $75, then you get a free bag or free tote. That's something that often happens at VS. So this lady comes in and she's super excited. She's shopping around, racking up her bill so she has enough money to get a free tote. Little does she know, I'm at the register giving away my last free tote. She comes up to me like, hey girl, I got my bag full. I got my 75. I'm ready to get my tote. I'm like, I'm so sorry, miss. I actually just gave away the last one. You would have thought I just told her that I murdered a family member of hers because she was tight. And she's like, oh, really? So what are you about to give me? Because I'm spending 75 today. So what do I get for free? She's like, a shirt? A perfume? I need something. I'm not leaving without it. Like, miss, I'm sorry, we don't have it. It's up to you if you want to spend the $75, but we have no more gifts. It's while supplies last. So after debating back and forth with her, like, I'm sorry, I can't just give you a free perfume. I can't just pick a shirt off the wall and give it to you. If you look at the coupon, it's this promotion is only while supplies last. So she's like, well, can you call some of the other stores? I want to see if they have the free bags left. I'm like, sure, I mean, I guess I can call, but they're not going to let you just come to the store and get a free bag. You have to spend the money at their store. She dismissed that idea pretty quickly after she realized that she would have to go from our mall to another mall to possibly get this bag. And she didn't have any time to drive. So she just decides to refuse to leave the store until somebody gets her something, because she is just so entitled. Of course, I have to get my manager involved, and he's like, look, let's just get this lady out of the store. Give her something. What do we have back here? So I'm digging behind the register, and we just so happen to find this old tote bag, not the one that we were promoting, an old one. So she spent the 75 and got that random tote bag just to keep her quiet. So after debating back and forth with her, like, I'm sorry, I can't just give you a free perfume. I can't just pick a shirt off the wall and give it to you. If you look at the coupon, it's this promotion is only while supplies last. So she's like, well, can you call some of the other stores? I want to see if they have the free bags left. I'm like, sure, I mean, I guess I can call, but they're not going to let you just come to the store and get a free bag. You have to spend the money at their store. She dismissed that idea pretty quickly after she realized that she would have to go from our mall to another mall to possibly get this bag. And she didn't have any time to drive. So she just decides to refuse to leave the store until somebody gets her something, because she is just so entitled. Of course, I have to get my manager involved, and he's like, look, let's just get this lady out of the store. Give her something. What do we have back here? So I'm digging behind the register, and we just so happen to find this old tote bag, not the one that we were promoting, an old one. So she spent the 75 and got that random tote bag just to keep her quiet. So I'm looking at this dirty, stinky bra, and I'm like, what am I about to do? So I'm picking it up with tissue paper, I'm analyzing it, and finally I'm looking in at the date and I see that it's an old bra that we don't even make anymore. But you know, VS will pretty much take anything back because they love to keep their customers happy. So, you know, I have to call my manager on the walkie and get his permission. He has to take a look at it, but as per usual, we took it back. And she went home with a brand new bra. And to be honest with y'all, I'm happy because that bra was filthy and dirty and smelly and she needed a new one. I said, sis, you should probably pick up a few before you go. But it is what it is. I'm happy she got a new bra, but please don't return nasty, dirty, used items. Like, it's so gross and I hated having to deal with that when I worked at VS. If you have a question about VS, a question about my story, leave it in the comments below. Also, follow me for more VS horror stories. One time I was behind the register at Victoria's Secret. This customer walks in and immediately everybody spots her as a red flag. She's just picking up items, throwing them in her bag, not looking at sizes, not looking at colors. So everybody's like, Everyone's on their walkie like, watch this customer. She's coming to the fitting room. She's headed to the cash wrap. Somebody get her. Check her ID. Get her. Get her. She has a bag full of stuff. And guess who gets her at the register? Me. So she comes to my register and she dumps out her stuff and, you know, we're having a regular conversation. Hi, how are you? Yada, yada, yada. Her total comes up to probably between $700 to $900. It was expensive. My manager is at the register next to me talking to me on the walkie. Ashley, make sure you get that ID. Don't matter what she's using, make sure you get that ID. So I ask her for the ID because she's paying credit. Why do you need to ask for my ID? Just take it, run it. I'm like, no ma'am, I'm sorry, I need your ID for the purchase. She starts to raise her voice at me. So she's raising her voice at me and I'm like, but I just couldn't, y'all. So I was like, I can raise my voice too. Do you want to play this game? Because I'll win, promise. And she's like, oh, well, what time do you get off work? And I'm like, I'm closing, I'm actually getting off at 11. Would you like to pick me up? And then she calls me stupid. She's like, you're fucking stupid. And I'm like, okay, you know what? I'm gonna eat that. Then she calls me a dumb bitch. Whew. So I took a deep breath. And I said, fuck you, you dumbass bitch. Your broke ass can't even afford these motherfucking clothes and you over here trying to scam me. Fuck off my line. And honestly, me and her just started going back and forth at each other like, My manager's like, go to the back, go to the back, go to the back. I'm still cursing her out as I'm walking to the back of the store. I really thought I would get fired, but I actually didn't.
Story time on how my lifelong best friend and I found out that we're actually related. Submitted by Sydney. To preface this story, I am a white female and my lifelong best friend is African American. I'm mentioning this because it's relevant to the story. Now for some backstory, my best friend, who we'll call Dana, has been in my life since the 3rd grade. We originally met in the cafeteria on a day that I forgot my lunch. Due to the fact that I was on medication at the time, I needed to eat, but I kept quiet because I didn't want to make a fuss, as my mom would say. Luckily enough, Dana ended up noticing me sitting alone without food and decided to offer me her carrots, cucumbers, and one of her Oreo cookies. We have been friends ever since. Our parents weren't besties, but they spent quite a lot of time together because Dana and I spent every waking minute with each other. However, when we got to our senior year of high school, everything changed for us. At our school, you're required to do a senior project at the end of the year as a final, so I decided to do it on my family. I figured since I was going to be the first generation college student, it would be cool to trace where I came from to appreciate where I'm going. It made sense in my head, and my teacher thought it was a great idea, so since I wanted an A, I put all of my effort into it. Thankfully, my dad was my right-hand man when it came to navigating the ancestry information and tests online. After a few weeks, I completed my senior project and prepared it for class. This is where things got a little weird. So in true best friend fashion, I ended up showing the finished project to Dana at her house. Naturally, she thought it was great. Her mom, on the other hand, stopped what she was doing and focused all her attention on my project. I won't lie, I thought she was interested in it because it was good and because I'm a genius. But when she started writing down some of the names and taking a keen interest in certain people, I started to get a little worried. Little did I know the story was so much deeper than I realized. After I finally submitted my project into school and received the A that I deserved, I received a text from my mom telling me that Dana's mom asked her to ride the bus with me so that we can come back to my house together. Now, this wasn't an unusual thing, but it didn't normally happen in the middle of the week, so both of us were a bit caught off guard. By the time we both reached my house, we found my parents and Dana's mom sitting together on the couch with a stack of documents in between them. I don't know what we were originally expecting, but Dana's mom opened the floor by telling us that the 2 people mentioned in my family tree were also mentioned in Dana's. According to records, Dana and I are cousins. Me, being the blunt, outlandish one, decided to mention the elephant in the room. We're related, but I'm white. I half expected my mom to give me an evil eye, or my dad to laugh, but instead, Dana's mom looked at mine and they both sighed. Dana, Sydney, I think you both should sit down. Dana's mom spoke in a voice that I had never heard her use before. It was a strange mixture of seriousness and concern. Either way, when Dana and I did sit down, we had no idea what we were about to learn. Truth be told, Dana and I were stoked about the idea of being related. Our friendship made us feel like we were sisters already, but we couldn't understand how we could have been related this whole time and had never known, until my mom opened up with the truth about our family. According to my mom, one of the 2 names that Dana's mom recognized was indeed a member of my family. The reason neither I or my mom ever heard about him is because he was exiled. And I mean legit exiled, like some straight up we don't talk about Bruno stuff. She practically had to pull my grandmother's teeth to learn the whole truth behind his expulsion. My ancestor, who we'll call James, was completely disowned by our family because, wait for it, he was in love with a black woman. This black woman, who we'll call Mary, was the ancestor of Dana and her mom. So the story was, James was always a fan of diversity. He attended several civil rights movements, marches, and even advocated heavily for the equal rights of African American people during a time where that was unthinkable. He had no shame in this, but his parents hated him for it. Since James worked for his father, his parents even went so far as to force him to have shifts that would directly interfere with him going to protests and marches. One night during a civil rights protest, James was driving home from work and a woman literally swung open his door, jumped in his passenger seat, and ordered him to drive. James apparently did not hesitate in driving off with this new female companion. He even convinced her to get into his trunk in order to avoid any issues while driving through the neighborhoods in case people were looking for protesters. I wouldn't say it was love at first sight, but she definitely made an impression. So much of an impression that James and Mary began seeing each other. When things began to get serious, James decided to inform his parents. Sadly, they forbade it, stating that if he continued to see her, he was dead to them. So James took all he had and left. He built an entirely new life with Mary that had obviously been successful given where we are now. Not a single day goes by that I don't talk to Dana. In fact, I'll be standing as her proud maid of honor next month, and I can't wait for our children to know the story of how we're all connected. Storytime on when I thought my mom was a genuine serial killer, submitted by Katrina. Now, to preface this story, I have to tell you I was only 8 years old. I was a latchkey kid and my mom was frequently working. We still have a pretty great relationship, it's just I didn't see her very often sometimes. I grew up in a household where it was me, my mom, and my older brother. And we all knew that my mom kept all the good snacks in her closet. I'm talking Oreos, Rice Krispie treats, the good kind of cereal. And she knew we knew. So one day when she was at work, I went fumbling in her closet looking for some Rice Krispie treats because they were my favorite. But in my pursuit to find them, I stumbled across her grown-up toy. I don't know what to call it so TikTok won't ban me, but we all know what we're talking about here. So I was 8 and I didn't understand that these weren't real body parts. So I seriously thought my mother had cut off some poor man's Peter Whacker and left it in her closet as a trophy. So I did the only thing my little mind could think, hide it. That way, if the police ever came looking for it, no one would know where it was but me. You'll never believe how my mom responded when she got home from work. To my utter surprise, my mother said nothing at all. After a few days, I kind of got concerned. Maybe she hadn't noticed it was missing, or maybe she thought she destroyed it already. After all, she did tend to forget things a lot, and I felt like I did her a solid by getting rid of it in the first place. After a few days, I felt like I should be rewarded, so I made my casual trip to her closet for more snacks. After fumbling around a little, I found another one of her toys, and this is where it all began for me. In my little mind, she wasn't just a murderer anymore, she was a serial killer at this point, because apparently when I took her trophy the first time, she went and got another. She found another man, cut off his Peter Whacker, and had an entirely new trophy on her hands. The amount of guilt I felt was unimaginable, so I did the only thing I could think of. I told my older brother. I brought him the first toy that I found, gathered the second, burst into his room, and yelled, "Mom is a serial killer. I found her trophies," and I dumped them on the side of his bed. Now, instead of him explaining to me the situation, he actually went along with it, and we made a plan to confront our mother. You'll never believe how she took it. When my mother finally got home, she was carrying a handful of groceries. My original plan was to put the toys on the table and ask her about them. However, my brother had another plan that he didn't quite fill me in on. As soon as my mother made it to the kitchen, he tossed one of her toys to her. It ended up hitting her in the chest and landing in one of the grocery bags. The conversation went something like this. "We found your trophies." "What?" "Your trophies, Mom. We found them in the closet." "What the hell were you doing in my closet, Curtis?" "I was just looking for snacks," I chimed in. "It doesn't matter. We found them and we want to know where the bodies are," my brother interrupted. My mom paused for a moment and looked at him before looking at me and then back at him. "Bodies?" she questioned. "Yeah, the victims that these belong to." My brother pointed to the other toy on the table. To my surprise, my mother burst into laughter. I mean, to the point where she was kneeling over and gasping for air. "Well, fine," she answered. "We'll have dinner, and afterwards I'll tell you the truth." I was ecstatic. After days of sitting on this, I would finally hear the truth from my mother herself. My mom, being so calm throughout the entire ordeal, nearly made the dinner unbearable. When we were eventually finished, my brother was the one who spoke first, basically asking my mom what was up. She put her hands on the table and basically said that she wanted to turn herself into the police, and that she would make plans for us to live with my grandmother so that she could do her time in prison. From what I could remember, I started crying immediately, and I became almost hysterical when she pulled out her phone and started diving. My brother ended up fake crying in the background when my mom finally got up from the table and started mumbling into her phone. When she got to the window closest to our front door, she stared into the distance as if she was really contemplating what our lives would be like without her, while I was in the background crying, telling her I was sorry and that I would never go in her closet again. After she finally hung up the phone, my brother walked over and told her she was doing the right thing, and then the doorbell rang, and my brother announced that the police were here. But before I was able to throw a genuine fit, my mother stopped me, got down on her knees and said, "See how bad this could have gotten, all because you went in my closet and touched and took something that did not belong to you. So while your moms would have punished you and been done with it, mine just decided to psychologically damage me to the point where I have never gone in her closet for anything since."
My dad was secretly in love with me. Hi, my name is Michaela and I'm 18 years old. Now, I know this story is really crazy, but you're just gonna have to hear me out and be the judge. So, growing up, I always had an overprotective father. He made it very clear that he didn't want me wearing any makeup, he didn't want me having any boyfriends and to focus on school, never wear revealing clothing, and to be home by 7 p.m. Which I thought was pretty unfair, but he wasn't necessarily strict about anything else. My mom died when I was about 6 years old, so my dad always compared me to her. He would say things like, "You're just like your mother, you got your mother's looks, you're gonna be so gorgeous when you grow up." And he said these things to me when I was younger, not when I was 18 now. But yeah, he was also very excessively clingy. He would always dress me, bathe me, feed me, text me throughout school. He would just never leave me alone. Until one day I got really sick of it. I got sick of all shenanigans and I confronted him about it. I told him to let me breathe and give me space. I was around 16 years old this time. He said, "Why? You're my precious little baby." And I told him, "I'm 16 now, I can do all these things by myself." He gave me the silent treatment for literally about a week, but he agreed. I remember one time I was looking for something. I don't really remember what it was, but I went into my dad's room and I kid you not, he had photos of me everywhere. Like, I kid you not, he had an entire photo collage of 12 photos on his wall, on each wall, and there were 4 walls, mind you. It was so weird and made me uncomfortable. Some of the photos of when I was wearing a blank. I told my best friend about it and she said it was extremely weird, as if he was in love with you or something. And I said, I know, I don't know what to do. She said just to leave it alone and come to her place often, and I did. So months later, I eventually got a new boyfriend, and his name was Michael. And I wanted to introduce him to my dad, but what he said next was really horrible. So I surprised my dad by bringing my new boyfriend Michael over to dinner to introduce them, and my dad absolutely flipped for no reason. He literally called my boyfriend a bunch of racial slurs and called him a darkie and told him to get out of his house. I thought this was absolutely horrible and I apologized to Michael. I didn't talk to my dad for a really long time, but one day he barged into my room drunk. I can't necessarily state what he did because it's too graphic for TikTok, but it's up on my YouTube channel now, so if you want to hear the uncensored version, it's definitely on there. But to sum it up, he made me extremely uncomfortable, and he literally said that I remind him so much of my mother that it's hard for him to control himself. I was extremely uncomfortable, and I told my best friend about this, and I literally lived with her until senior year. I haven't talked to my dad since then, but he's tried to contact me a couple of times. Should I contact him? Am I the a-hole for exposing my best friend's photos? Hi, my name is Tiffany, and I'm currently 16 years old in high school. So when I was a freshman, I was a complete total loser, but when sophomore year came, I slowly started becoming one of the popular girls in school. Every boy wanted me, but I declined. But somehow I met this girl Eden along the way. We were at a party and she was just staring at me the entire time until she walked up to me and asked me to be friends. She gave me really weird shady vibes, but I decided to accept her as my friend anyways. Me and her clicked well for whatever reason. We had so many similarities, but it also seemed kind of bland and like she was just saying she had those things in common for whatever reason. But anyways, I let it slide, but I noticed that she dressed like me over time. When I first met her, she looked pretty plain. It looked like her mother dressed her. But I bought clothes up for her 21. Slowly, she started doing the same and dressing her hair like mine and wearing makeup like me. It was kind of weird. But one day, there were flowers left in my locker. And there was a note as well, and I wondered who it was from. So there was actually flowers on my locker, and I was wondering who it was. And it was from the hottest guy in school, Kyle. Kyle was the quarterback of the football team. He also participated in lacrosse and soccer. He was just amazing and so sweet and what every girl wanted. And the fact that he was asking me out, amazing. So I decided to accept his proposal and go out with him. The first 2 months was a dream, but around the 3rd month, he would start becoming controlling and abusive, verbally and physically. He would want to control what I wore in front of his parents and sometimes at parties, saying how I looked like a blank. I tried confronting him on this problem, but he said if I had a problem with it, I could just break up with him, but I obviously didn't want to do that because I thought that I loved him. So one time, we were just sitting at the park and I noticed his phone was buzzing a lot. I asked him who it was and he said it was probably his dad or something like that, which sounded unusual, so I decided to do a bit of investigating. So I decided to investigate his phone a little bit. I kid you not, I saw so many photos, so many, about like 50 from all different kinds of genders. Inappropriate photos, if you know what I mean. But they were all faceless. But there was this one feminine body who wore red lingerie with glitter on it. And I couldn't figure out who it was, but she was definitely a pattern in his phone. I didn't say anything to him about it. After that, I had left and cried and went home and I called Eden over. I told Eden everything and she just looked in shock. She told me how horrible this was and that I shouldn't have to go through that. She basically comforted me the entire time. So weeks went by and it was my birthday. I had obviously broken up with Kyle, but Kyle was talking about getting back with me, so I assumed, he changed and our relationship would progress. But one of my friends had told me that Eden had been hooking up with him behind my back, and I asked for proof. As I did that, Eden walked in. I confronted Eden about this and she said she was lying. I asked my other friend for proof and she showed me. There was a video and multiple pictures. I can't disclaim because of TikTok, but it's on my YouTube channel now.